The Kyusu teapot is the best tool for preparing Japanese green teas, but does it work for oolong? In this episode, we're going to prepare an oolong tea in the Kyusu teapot and see if it can produce a flavorful cup of tea. Let's get started. So what I have here is some Gaba Oolong, and I have my black Tokoname Kyusu teapot. So the black Tokoname Kyusu is coming from Tokoname, Japan. It's made from a very high quality clay. You can see it's slightly glazed here. It's got a little bit of a matte finish. It's got a built-in clay filter, and it's got this nice side handle, which is a really important feature. A couple things that this accomplishes is, first of all, it makes it easier to pour. So instead of this top handle like you would have with a Western style teapot, you can pour it with just one hand and a simple turn of the wrist. So these features make it very easy to prepare all sorts of types of teas, but it's specifically designed for Japanese green teas. One of the reasons it is specifically designed for Japanese green teas has to do with the water capacity. Most Japanese green teas are prepared with a lower leaf to water ratio than a Chinese tea, for example. So this larger water capacity helps with that. And the other factor that makes it perfect for Japanese teas is this filter in here. So the holes in here are very small, so it works well for sifting out smaller leaf teas and Japanese green teas because they're made from the youngest leaves and they are steamed, so they're a little bit more brittle. They tend to have these smaller leaf particles. But today we want to try to answer the question, can this Kyusu teapot be used to prepare an oolong tea like this Gaba Oolong? It works quite well for Japanese oolong teas, so we recently found a Japanese oolong tea. Japan is mostly famous for its green teas, but there are some types of post-fermented teas and oolong teas and black teas as well. And the oolong from Miyazaki Sabo is a great example of a Japanese green tea. It's very light, it's very flowery. It has a kind of a thinner, more delicate mouthfeel to it. So quite different from the more roasted oolong teas you'll find elsewhere in the world. So I'd encourage you, if you're curious about oolong teas or you love oolong teas, I would encourage you to check that one out because it's a really great tea and very unique. It's pretty rare to find an oolong tea in Japan. And we're excited to be able to work with a farmer that produces a really great one. But today we're going to be trying out a Gaba Oolong. We'll do a video about this where we kind of explain this tea type a little bit more. Basically, it's produced in a kind of special environment that doesn't allow a whole lot of oxygen in, and this kind of increases certain health properties of the tea, but we'll get more into that in another video. So I just loaded up the Kyusu with around 5 grams of leaves. It's hard to tell with these oolongs because, as you'll notice, the oolong leaves are very tightly rolled. So, what may look like much less than 5 grams of leaves is actually 5 grams. So if you're preparing ball rolled oolongs, as it's called, I would recommend using a scale because it's very different measurement compared to other types of teas. I'm going to be using 90 degrees Celsius water, so much hotter than I usually do, and a similar leaf to water ratio as I would with a Japanese green tea. So 150 milliliters of water for 5 grams of leaves. Let the leaves brew for about 1 minute. You'll see I have one thumb on the top of the teapot and I have my hand on the side handle. And this makes it very easy to pour out the tea. So I'm going to be doing a very light first infusion. The recommended steeping time is 2 minutes. I'm just doing 1 minute here because I kind of want to get that first aromatic infusion of the tea before we get more into the tasting. The smell of the wet leaves is kind of more in these kind of baked pastries, a little bit cinnamony, almost like a raisin. Yeah, I would say like a cinnamon raisin pastry is what I'm getting from these leaves. Very, very sweet, very unique. The flavor is very subtle. It's got some cinnamon characteristics to it, so a little bit of that spiciness. Still very light, not flowery compared to the Japanese oolong. This tea is definitely more in that kind of spicy cinnamon raisin type of direction, whereas the Miyazaki oolong is much more flowery, much more perfumey, a little bit creamy as well. It does have a little bit of this creaminess to it like you would get in a milk oolong, like a Jinchuan. So before we move on to the second brewing, let's take a look at the leaves. You'll see they're just starting to unfurl here, and you're starting to see these long stems start to detach. The good part about this teapot is it's got a very wide shape to it, so you're giving these leaves plenty of space to unfurl. So in addition to being good for Japanese green teas, it's also good for these oolong teas because they're so tightly rolled that they really need a lot of space to expand as they brew. Let's go ahead and brew this a second time. Same temperature water. We're going to be using another brewing time of 1 minute. The aroma coming off of the leaves is a little bit more roasted, a little bit darker. I'm getting some of this tartness with the tea in the second brewing. Some of the floral notes are coming in. Not getting as much sweetness, but I still get that kind of that sweet, sour, spicy kind of raisins. Getting a little bit of that toasty note. So the first brewing was very light. This one's a little bit warmer, more full-bodied, a little bit heartier as well. So far I like the second brewing much better. Let's go for one final brewing of this tea. But first let's take a look and see how the leaves are expanding. So the Kyusu is providing a ton of space for these leaves. So it does work very well. Just the general shape of the teapot is working very well for this oolong tea. Because the most important thing when it comes to oolong is that the leaves have enough space to expand. And while the gaiwan, for example, is a great tool for brewing oolong, the leaves, I can't help but think that the leaves are getting packed inside there and that they would need a little bit more space to open up and fully release their flavor into the water. The third brewing seems like it's the darkest of the three. So I'm getting these kind of cinnamon cookies almost. It's really nice and sweet. So after 3 brewings, it does seem like the Kyusu teapot is up for the task of brewing this oolong tea. You can see the leaves are really not packed in at all there. They have plenty of space. This is the most important thing when it comes to oolong, that you give the leaves enough space because they're so densely packed. So for the case of oolong at least, and green teas, the Kyusu teapot does work very well. I think if you want to really get the most out of this particular tea, you probably want a slightly higher leaf to water ratio because the tasting notes were just a little bit weak on this. But that can easily be adapted just by adding less water to the Kyusu. So it's not really a problem with this teapot particularly. It's more about what style of brewing are you using, what leaf to water ratio are you using, and what brewing time. So if I were to do this again, I would probably adjust the leaf to water ratio slightly, probably use a little bit less water, slightly longer brewing time, and really kind of pushing this tea so I could get more of the tasting notes. But if you have a Kyusu, if that's the only teapot you have at home, definitely is going to work for oolong tea, definitely black tea as well, green tea certainly, and I would imagine white tea and pu'er as well. So if you're looking to pick up one of these Kyusu teapots, you can get one for free when you sign up for the monthly tea club. You're going to be getting the red Tokonami Kyusu, which is the perfect tea for beginners. It's got a nice glaze to it, so it works on all different types of teas. This is kind of like your all-purpose teapot that you can go from hojicha to gyokuro and not really have much cross-contamination of the flavors because of that glaze. And it also has a built-in metal filter, which does a much better job when it comes to sifting out these tiny leaf pieces. So it works for fukumushi teas or deep steam teas. And with the monthly tea club itself, you'll get monthly deliveries of some of the best teas we found during our travels around Japan. We'll send them to you for a 16% discount or more. So it's a great way to save money and also try a bunch of different types of teas. And then, of course, you get your teapot sent with you for free the first month. So you can sign up today and cancel anytime. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.